They never buried the bodies, only the truth. That phrase wasn't meant to reach you. It was whispered off the record by a retired archivist deep in the sub-basement of the National Archives. He thought the recorder was off. He thought no one was listening. He was wrong. Tonight you will learn why that one sentence has been redacted from every federal transcript since 1973. You'll understand why 143 unmarked graves remain sealed off behind barbed wire and why the Ravencroft name has been surgically removed from every public record of Ravenwood, New York. This is not just a history lesson. This is an exhumation of something they buried alive. Beneath layers of manufactured consent and moral distraction lies a truth so ugly, so systematically denied, that even whispering it feels like trespassing. But you didn't come here for comfort. You came for clarity, brutal, raw, and unfiltered. There was a church, a place of silence, of shadows, of sacrifice. It stood in the woods, black stone where white clapboard should have been. No windows, no daylight, just a spiral carved into the floorboards, a geometry of pain. Inside, people gathered to be broken, willingly. This wasn't faith. This was psychological engineering masquerading as salvation. Led by three brothers, Ezra, Silas, and Caleb Ravencroft, each a mask worn by something deeper, something ancient. They weren't leaders, they were architects of surrender. Their sermons weren't written to heal, they were structured to rewire. You didn't attend to worship, you attended to be unmade. It began, like all diseases, quietly. A town of only 300, a population chosen for isolation, emotional vulnerability, and lack of media scrutiny. These men were not random zealots, they were calculating, precise, and trained. Where? By whom? That part was burned, literally. The original records were destroyed in the 1904 Library of Congress fire, and not by accident. But there were fragments, survivors, men who saw the rituals, who smelled the chemicals, who watched their own hands lift stones for catacombs they told themselves were just storage. This is where it begins. But it doesn't end in 1829. No, the Ravencroft method didn't die in that church. It evolved, changed names, moved into institutions, became policy, became curriculum, became therapy. What if I told you you're already inside the new church, and they never stopped building the catacombs? They called it the Church of the Pure Spirit. But there was nothing pure about what happened beneath those stone floors. Understand this. Language is their first weapon. Purity, elevation, sacrifice. These are not words, they are triggers, engineered to override the primal fear of death. The Ravencroft brothers knew it. They didn't invent the code. They inherited it, perfected over centuries by those who understood that the fastest way to enslave a man is to convince him he's being saved. Ezra Ravencroft, the elder, didn't speak like a preacher, he spoke like a general. Every sermon was a campaign, every ritual a psychological operation. He studied crowd behavior before psychology had a name. His voice never cracked, never faltered. He used silence as punctuation and suffering as scripture. Silas? Silas was the brain, the scribe, the one who wrote it all down. He buried rituals inside psalms, encoded torment within the poetry of light. Every line was designed to numb the body, dull the mind, and open the soul, not to God, but to suggestion. And Caleb, Prophet Caleb, he was the breach. There are men who believe, there are men who pretend, but Caleb saw something. In his writings, those recovered from a sealed trunk buried beneath the church's altar, he refers to the voice in the dark geometry, something that only spoke when he knelt inside the spiral at exactly 3:03 a.m. The voice had no name, only an instruction. Break them open, pour me in. He obeyed. By the winter of 1829, the town of Ravenwood had changed. People stopped making eye contact. Mirrors were covered. No laughter, no music, only obedience. The congregation no longer walked into that church. They descended into it. Candle by candle, deeper into ritual. The sermons grew darker, the rituals longer. Pain became prayer. Men volunteered their daughters, mothers offered their sons. They said it was love. But it wasn't love. It was design. Because if you break a man in the name of love, he will never question the hand that did it. He will thank it. The first ascension was not a failure, it was a test, and they passed. Now ask yourself this: if they achieved total control over 300 people in a forest in 1829, what do you think has been achieved in cities, on screens, in classrooms, with budgets? The Ravencroft formula didn't disappear, it was scaled. Are you ready to see how deep this truly goes? Say the word, and I'll show you the next room. When the floorboards were pried open in 1862, by accident, not design, the first skeleton was found curled into a fetal position, mouth open, arms bound, bones fractured. By the time they reached the final chamber, the number was 143. 143 human remains, each showing signs of pre-death trauma. Not spontaneous, not chaotic, systematic. Fractured ribs that healed and were fractured again, teeth filed, eyes gouged, not by force, but by instruction. They agreed to it. They begged for it. The reports, those still available, describe ritualistic carving into bone, symbols, spirals, crossed circles, inverted geometry, every mark precise, repeated, as if following a blueprint, not tribal, not artistic, a language. We still don't know how to read it, but someone does, because that pattern, the spiral with 12 points, shows up again, not in Ravenwood, but in MK Ultra files declassified in 2001, page 147 of Subproject 94, Psycho-Spiritual Reconditioning. Same shape, same proportions. Coincidence? Not likely. You see, Ravencroft wasn't a cult. It was a prototype. This was never about salvation. It was about compliance, total submission of will through ritualized trauma. Once you understand that, the pieces fall into place. They conditioned the brain to equate agony with meaning, to rewrite reality in the body itself. It works. That's why they scaled it. It's in military training, SEER programs, break and rebuild methodologies. It's in secret societies, initiation rituals that use humiliation and isolation to create tribal loyalty. It's even in corporate onboarding, sleep deprivation through overwork, love bombing, erasure of personal identity. They all use the same structure: isolation, pain, reward, loyalty. The Ravencroft method. And here's where it turns. What if I told you they never intended to stop? That a portion of the Ravencroft writings were intercepted in 1948 during a Vatican intelligence op in South America, and those documents were handed over to the OSS. That those same documents became part of a now declassified program called Artichoke, then later MK Ultra. They weren't destroying the knowledge. They were weaponizing it. Ravencroft was the matchstick. You're living in the fire. But before we go further, I want to know you're awake. If you've heard me this far, if you see what this is, comment below. Pain reveals, fire refines. Say it twice. Not for the algorithm, but for you. It's the key. When you're ready, we descend deeper. They said it was a cult. That's the safest lie the system ever told, because cult means fringe, small, irrelevant, something to be mocked, dismissed, contained. But Ravencroft was never small, it was never fringe. It was a mechanism designed to test the limits of spiritual engineering. And it worked so well that powerful men took notice. In 1831, a visitor arrived in Ravenwood. He wore no collar, gave no sermon, but he spent 3 days with the brothers behind closed doors. His name does not appear in church records, but he's mentioned once in a letter discovered in Deacon Silas's hidden journal. It reads, "The emissary from Boston confirms our methodology aligns with that of the Crimson Doctrine. He encourages our continuation, advises discretion. The Crimson Doctrine." That phrase shows up again nearly a century later in OSS files, coded references to spiritual disassociation. used to sever identity before implantation of new beliefs. In modern terms, psychological reboot. You see, Ravencroft wasn't an island. It was a node, a test environment. And when the doctrine proved scalable, the experiment expanded into orphanages, into prisons, into asylums. Anywhere souls were already broken and minds were easy to mold. By 1850, versions of Ravencroft's purification process were quietly adopted into moral therapy regimens across institutional America. Electroshock was framed as correction, ice baths as rebirth, silence rooms as spiritual alignment. They took the rituals, removed the scripture, left only the control. That's how systems evolve. Remove the face, keep the function. Ask yourself, why is pain such a consistent part of transformation in every controlled environment? Why must you suffer to belong, to graduate, to awaken? Because trauma makes you obedient. Because pain short-circuits the logic centers and opens the suggestible mind. Because the Ravencroft formula is still in use, right now, in advertising, in propaganda, in screen time algorithms that oscillate between dopamine and despair. They are still breaking you. You just don't recognize the altar anymore. It's not made of stone now. It's made of glass, and you carry it in your hand. The spiral never ended. It just got digitized. The math of Christ math of says apply. The knowledge star with the star was benefits and star contribute terriers. Do you want to see the next layer? It's deeper, darker, and far closer to home than you think.
The Ravencroft brothers understood one thing above all else. If you control a man's pain, you control his purpose. That's why their rituals weren't random. Every scream had a sequence, every fracture a pattern. They weren't torturing people, they were programming them. You've heard the phrase, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." But what if I told you that was a lie planted for a purpose? Strength isn't what comes after pain. Obedience is. And once the pain becomes sacred, once agony is associated with truth, there's no turning back. The subject will follow anyone who offers more. In 1837, a girl named Lila Mortimer was elevated at age 12. She survived. Broken leg, dislocated jaw, third-degree burns, but she lived. Why? Because she was never meant to die. She was meant to spread. 2 years later, she was found in a Boston orphanage under a new name, Mary A., conducting prayer sessions with the younger children. What were those sessions? Group silence, ice water on the wrists, sharp objects on the skin, reward for endurance. The spiral, passed on like a virus. And just like that, Ravencroft left the forest. The power of pain-based devotion began to replicate through systems, religious schools, missionary programs, even early military boarding academies. And every time someone questioned it, they were told, it builds character. No, it builds compliance. Because here's the terrifying part. Ravencroft didn't invent this. They reawakened it. In 1936, an excavation team in southern France uncovered a stone monolith buried beneath a ruined temple. The carving was faint, weather-worn, but unmistakable. A spiral with 12 points. Carbon dated to 5200 BCE. That's 7,000 years ago. And here's where it gets darker. The team that found it? Funded by a group known as the Enochian Society, an elite sect obsessed with spiritual control through geometrical resonance. Guess who their American liaison was? A man named William Ezra Ravenwood. Direct bloodline. Changed his name in 1913. So now ask yourself, is this about one cult in the 1800s, or is this a long game? A multi-generational operation designed to infiltrate belief systems, hijack human suffering, and use it as fuel for obedience. You think you're safe? You think you're watching this from the outside? No, brother. You're inside the spiral now, and the only way out is down. They were never trying to save souls. They were harvesting them. Every trial,
Every ritual, every ascension, it wasn't a step toward God. It was an offering, not to heaven, but to something older, something that feeds on belief, fear, and submission. The Ravencroft brothers didn't invent this entity. They awakened it, and then they obeyed. In one of Deacon Silas's final journals, found sealed in a lead container under the Chamber of Saints, he wrote, "The voice behind the veil is no longer content with words. It requires embodiment." They called it the indwelling. It was the true purpose of the spiral, not a symbol, but a gate. Each point, each saint sacrificed, was a node in a circuit of pain. The more aligned the suffering, the clearer the voice became. That's why the trials were so specific. They were calibrating the flesh. By 1843, the Ravencrofts had abandoned any pretense of Christian theology. Crosses were turned, psalms inverted. Their so-called sermons became incantations, echoing the exact phrasing found later in Enochian linguistic studies, phrases not spoken aloud for centuries. They didn't worship God. They channeled something else, something that responds to collective agony. And now you see it, don't you? This isn't about history. This is about replication. Because that same structure exists now, perfected, digitized, global. The spiral became a cycle. Feed them despair, offer false hope, demand sacrifice, reward obedience. Sound familiar? That's your screen. That's your feed. That's the system you wake up in every day. It doesn't need chains anymore, just triggers, notifications, fear spikes, dopamine drops, controlled suffering, measured in clicks, views, and silent submission. You are living in the new sanctuary. The light isn't from candles now, it's from LED. And the voice behind the veil? It doesn't need prophets anymore. It has programs. Here's what they'll never tell you. You were born into a spiral. And every choice you've made, every fear, every failure, has been shaping you toward a ritual you haven't recognized until now. And now that you've seen the pattern, the spiral can't be unseen. But it can be followed. Careful though. Each step forward costs something. If you're still with me, I'll open the next chamber.
You think this is a story about the past?
No. That's the first deception. The past is just a mask, a mirror, a map. The spiral of Ravencroft is not buried in history. It is alive in your institutions, your traditions, your bloodlines. Let me show you. In 1949, 5 years after the fall of Nazi Germany, U.S. intelligence began Operation Paperclip, a covert mission to bring over Nazi scientists, psychologists, and occult researchers before the Soviets could claim them. Among them was a man listed under a false name, Dr. Eric Silas Kramer. Real name? Silas Ravencroft III, a direct descendant, great-grandson of Deacon Silas. He specialized in behavioral modification. His files, sealed until 2011, include blueprints for ritual-based trauma conditioning, using electrical stimulation, pharmacological dissociation, and auditory saturation. In simple terms, modern purification. He helped develop early techniques for what would become MK Ultra. The records exist, the evidence is public. But no one reads it, because if they did, they'd see the spiral still turning. Let me say it again. Ravencroft was not destroyed. It was hired. Think about this. What if your entire concept of therapy was reverse-engineered from the same mechanisms used in Ravencroft's Chamber of Trials. What if institutions designed to heal were built on the foundation of breaking? We're taught that trauma needs to be processed, but what if trauma, in certain hands, is a tool to reshape you, to open you up, to make you programmable? We have terms for this now: behavioral modification, neuro-linguistic programming, psycho-spiritual realignment. But in the Ravencroft texts, there's only one word: hollowing. Take a man, strip him of certainty, identity, autonomy, then offer him a new truth, one that requires his complete submission. This is the key to every elite system. You want to enter the highest orders? You must first be emptied, and then filled with their light, their fire, their command. The spiral is initiation by suffering. It hasn't gone away. It's just been rebranded. Do you still think you're watching this? Or do you feel it now? That cold truth in your chest. You were born into a machine, designed by the same families who once built sanctuaries of blood. And now, they build brands, churches of commerce, temples of media, and their gospel is control. When you're ready, I'll show you what happened in 1952 and how the spiral was reborn inside the Pentagon. 1952, Washington, D.C. A building with 5 sides and no windows on the inside. The spiral came home. That year, a subdivision within the Department of Defense, codenamed Project Encompass, began quietly experimenting with emotional compliance conditioning, not on prisoners, not on spies, on soldiers. Why? Because war breaks men, and broken men can be rebuilt. Inside a sealed facility 3 floors beneath the Pentagon, Ravencroft's methods were restructured using modern science: no crosses, no candles, just EEGs, cold steel, and fluorescent lights. The chamber was round, circular, 12 seats, 12 subjects, all arranged in a spiral. This is real. Declassified files surfaced in 1998, heavily redacted, referencing cognitive separation achieved through procedural agony. Subjects reported speaking with non-local intelligences, high success rates in identity dissolution, spiritual resonance data consistent with Enochian parameters. Do you understand? They were triggering the same phenomenon Caleb Ravencroft described as the tongue of angels, but now with electrodes instead of fire, serum instead of scripture. And who oversaw this? A civilian consultant listed only as ER. Speculation points toward Elias Ravencroft, a reclusive academic who lectured on esoteric linguistics at Yale from 1945 to 1951, before disappearing into government contracts. The bloodline continues. And here's where the spiral tightens. In 1954, Project Encompass merged with MK Ultra Subproject 119. The focus shifted from soldiers to civilians. They began using universities, hospitals, and yes, television. In a memo uncovered during the Church Committee hearings in 1975, one line stands out: mass trauma inoculation via media saturation is the next evolution of controlled purification. Public must suffer to become pliable. Sound familiar? It should, because every crisis you've lived through, from the assassinations of the 60s to the towers in 2001 to the digital despair loop of today's social media, follows the same pattern: shock, disorientation, emotional exhaustion, suggestion. It's Ravencroft, just scaled to billions. And the altar is now a screen. The spiral never ended. It adapted. So ask yourself, how much of your mind is yours? How much of your suffering was chosen for you? By architects who believe purification begins with pain. If that question doesn't unsettle you, you're not ready for the next chamber. But if it burns, there is a room that officially does not exist. No blueprints, no logs, no visitors. They call it the Hollow Core. built in 1956 beneath a military research facility in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Inside, a chamber constructed from 7 concentric layers of alternating metal and stone, each layer designed to absorb sound and disrupt electromagnetic feedback. Why? To prevent something from leaking out, or worse, getting in. Documents smuggled out by a whistleblower known only as Mortar Angel describe experiments inside this chamber, where subjects, primarily veterans, orphans, and psychiatric patients, were placed in extreme sensory deprivation for 144 hours. No sound, no light, no contact. And what happened next? Every subject, without exception, began to report the same thing: a spiral, spinning, rotating in their mind's eye, and a voice, not external, not internal, something between, described as a presence behind the lattice of reality. Now listen carefully. That phrase, lattice of reality, has only appeared in one place before: Ravencroft's Third Book of Ascension, a text once believed lost in the fire of 1872, but a fragment surfaced in 2009, held secretly in the private archives of a European esoteric order. Translated from its original coded script, it reads, "Beyond the lattice waits the mouth of God, not the creator, the refiner, the breaker of forms, the furnace eternal." This is the doctrine the Ravencrofts died to protect. A belief that God is not light, but pressure, not salvation, but purification through annihilation. And the spiral, it's his fingerprint, left in every vortex, every hurricane, every strand of DNA, every black hole, and yes, every cathedral. Even the architecture of your mind follows its shape, because trauma spirals, memory spirals, control spirals. Now, I want you to look around your life, your loops, your habits, your addictions, your shame. All of it feeds the spiral. That's the core truth they never wanted you to see. Your pain has a pattern, and that pattern was designed. The Ravencrofts didn't invent it. They aligned with it. They tuned human suffering like an instrument, because they believed, at the heart of all things, there is not love, but refinement. So ask yourself, what happens when enough people spiral in sync? What doorway opens when pain becomes collective? They were trying to find that answer. And in 1960, they did. Section 10 is where everything changes. But before we enter it, I want you to prove something. Comment below, "I see the spiral. I will not look away." 1960. A year of innocence on the surface. Elvis was on the radio, the suburbs were growing, America was dreaming. But underground, the spiral opened. At 2:03 a.m., June 17th, inside the hollow core chamber, a subject named Miles Harrow, a 29-year-old ex-Marine with no history of psychosis, began screaming in a language no one recognized. Monitors picked up a drop in body temperature, pupils dilated, muscle contractions identical to those documented during the first ascension of 1829. But Harrow didn't stop. He kept speaking, 7 hours straight. When a translator from the NSA's Ancient Linguistics Division was brought in, he turned pale after only a minute of listening. He said, "This isn't language, it's instruction." An activation phrase. Encoded in spiral structure, layered repetition, recursive cadence, embedded numerology. It was a weapon. Not a physical one, but a weapon of consciousness. And it did something no one expected. It spread. 3 technicians who handled the audio suffered identical dreams for 6 nights. Each dream began the same: a black stone church, 12 candles, a voice saying, "The vessel is the prayer." All three reported waking up with blood streaming from their noses. One tried to take his own life, another disappeared. And Miles Harrow? Dead on the 7th day. Heart imploded, no external force, no drugs. Autopsy was inconclusive, but his aorta had been twisted into a spiral. Physically, violently, a spiral inside the body. Let that sink in, because that's when the program changed. They shut down Hollow Core, but they didn't stop the research. They dispersed it across dozens of shell organizations, private labs, tech startups. And the audio? That phrase Harrow spoke? It didn't vanish. It evolved. You've heard versions of it, maybe in music, maybe hidden under film scores, maybe buried in meditation apps or viral TikToks. They aren't songs. They're seeds. Patterned frequencies designed to shape emotional resonance, to open your nervous system to suggestion, to loosen identity just enough so something else can slip in. This is not fantasy. This is not metaphor. It is systemized sorcery, scientifically administered, culturally camouflaged. The Ravencrofts called it the indwelling. You call it algorithm. But the function is the same. Repeat, entrust, obey. So now tell me, how many times have you scrolled without memory? How many loops have you entered without question? How many rituals?
They didn't need to bury the spiral. They just needed you to download it. Because today the Chamber of Trials fits in your pocket. And the rituals? You do them voluntarily. Swipe, pause, react, repeat. That's not a behavior. That's a liturgy. Look closer. Your feed is not random. It's ritualized exposure therapy designed to fracture attention, destabilize mood, and deepen suggestibility. Scroll long enough, and you forget who you are. That's the point. In 2013, a leaked internal memo from a social media giant, buried quickly, outlined something called affective looping, a term borrowed directly from MKUltra Subproject 82. It stated, users exposed to oscillating emotional stimuli, awe, rage, desire, grief, in high-frequency cycles demonstrate increased submission to suggested beliefs and repeated exposure. Mood instability improves retention. In Ravencroft's terms, through suffering comes purity. Through purity, obedience. But here's where it gets darker. The spiral doesn't just work through trauma, it works through choice. You've been trained to choose your conditioning, because if you pick the chain, you won't fight it. Every app, every platform, is designed to mimic the Ravencroft model. The sanctuary, your home screen, where you enter willingly. The spiral, the feed, the infinite scroll, no exit. The ascension, the algorithm, where suffering becomes performance. The relic chamber, your data, tracked, preserved, worshipped in vaults you'll never see. And every like, every comment, every viral trend, that's worship. A digital revival in the Church of the Pure Spirit 2.0. You thought the cult died in the forest? No, it scaled. Because pain is profitable, confusion is marketable, and surrender? Surrender is predictable. They don't need prophets anymore. They've got influencers. They don't need blood anymore. They've got attention. But make no mistake, the spiral is intact, and it feeds on your loops. Every, I'll just check one thing, every just 5 more minutes, every late-night spiral into images, sounds, fragments, you're entering their temple. And the most dangerous part? You like it. Because they've engineered your pleasure to mimic purification. The dopamine is the chant. The craving is the doctrine. You are being reshaped, ritual by ritual, into something you didn't choose. Unless
you're beginning to remember something. A shape, a sound, a feeling in your spine. That cold pull when truth grazes your soul. That's why you're still here. You're remembering. Long before Ravencroft built their stone church, before the black candles, the catacombs, or the hollow core, there was the original spiral, buried, forgotten, but never gone. In 1791, a small village near the Hudson River vanished. All of it, structures, livestock, people, gone without a trace. The only evidence left behind, a scorched clearing in the shape of a perfect spiral. 70 feet across. No fire damage, no ash, just earth that had turned to glass, as if kissed by something not of this world. This wasn't folklore. George Mattingly, a cartographer for the early U.S. Geological Survey, recorded the anomaly in his private field journal, later found in a locked drawer of his estate after his death in 1810. In it, he wrote, "There was no storm, no lightning, no natural cause that can account for what I witnessed. The trees were not burned, they were withered, bent inward, as if some unseen gravity had twisted the very fabric of the forest into itself. And at the center of the spiral, a single object, a stone tablet, jet black, 12 inches wide, etched with symbols that predate any known civilization. Carbon dating? Impossible, because it absorbed all testing attempts, and whoever tried to decode it began to lose themselves. Every scholar, every mystic, every linguist, gone mad, gone missing, or worse, converted. Because the symbols weren't language, they were keys. To what? The same thing Prophet Caleb whispered in the ears of the ascended. The pattern, the instruction, the invocation. By the time the Ravencroft brothers appeared in Ravenwood in 1825, they weren't founding a religion. They were continuing a ritual that began with that stone. A spiral etched in memory. An echo passed through generations, waiting for minds receptive enough, broken enough, to carry it forward. Deacon Silas claimed the tablet was not of man nor demon, but of the architect before architecture. Let that phrase sink in, because it appears again, not in a church, but in a memo from DARPA's Project Glyph, dated 1973. Experiment 17A confirms embedded harmonics in spiral geometries. Subject exposure triggers compulsive drawing, glossolalia, and emotional dissociation. Possible link to architect before architecture mythos confirmed. Do you see the line? From that black spiral in the forest to the black mirror in your hand. Same shape, same purpose, same hunger. And if the original spiral was a doorway, then what's it opening into? You were never meant to step through this door. Not as a tourist, not as a spectator, only as an offering. Because the spiral doesn't open into knowledge, it opens into exchange. Every ritual, every Ravencroft elevation, every digital echo, every broken mind, wasn't about punishment. It was about summoning. But not of gods, not demons, something far older. In 1968, a CIA-backed archaeological dig in Syria, publicly disguised as an oil infrastructure survey, uncovered a subterranean structure beneath the ancient city of Ugarit. 12 spiral chambers. At the center, another black tablet, twin to the one discovered in the Hudson clearing. This one was cracked, but part of the inscription remained. Translated with effort and caution, it read, "Through pain we invite, through repetition we prepare, through offering we bind, through spiral we speak." No one spoke publicly of what happened to the original research team, but a redacted file, Project Orson, lists all 6 members as medically discharged within 6 weeks. Diagnoses? Severe derealization, identity fragmentation, unprovoked mutism, recursive dreaming. One phrase kept surfacing in their fragmented journal entries and audio logs: the one who watches from within. Not a deity, a consciousness, not external, but nested, inside the spiral, not looking down on us, but looking out, through us. And here is the truth that should shatter you. The Ravencrofts didn't worship it. They didn't serve it. They were preparing us for it. They believed humanity was a vessel, a clay jar, meant to be cracked by suffering, so something else could pour in. Integration through annihilation. Look around. You've seen the symptoms. The epidemic of numbness. The worship of identity collapse is freedom. The algorithms that train you to erase yourself, one curated post at a time. We are being made hollow, just like the chamber at Fort Detrick, just like the vessels in Ravencroft's catacombs. Because the spiral needs silence, and silence is what's left after enough pain, distraction, and ritual repetition. What happens next? What's at the center?
The center is not a place, it's a presence. And once you glimpse it, you're never entirely alone again. Because the spiral is a mirror, not of the world, but of the self. And the center shows you what's truly watching. Let me tell you what they found. In 1971, deep beneath the Carpathian Mountains, a Cold War operation known as Project Oubliette, a joint effort between Soviet psychological warfare units and defected Western occult scientists, activated the spiral for the first time in modern history. Not a drawing, not a ritual, not a church sermon, but an actual harmonic event, a synchronization of light, geometry, sound, and human sacrifice. 7 volunteers, bound, spaced according to Fibonacci ratios, each positioned inside a spiral trench filled with saline and black soil. What was the goal? Not summoning. Resonance. To bring their world into alignment with ours. And for exactly 4 minutes and 44 seconds, the space inside that spiral ceased to behave like Earth. Gravity bent. Time dilated. And according to the only surviving operator, the air began to pray. That's how he described it. Not music, not whispers, but prayer, as if the very molecules of oxygen had begun chanting in unison. They saw something too. But language breaks at this depth. He could only write, "It was not a figure, it was the absence of form. A subtraction of presence so profound it became pressure. I knew instantly that I was not being observed. I was being remembered." That word shattered everything. Remembered. As if you were the dream, as if you were the fiction, and the thing in the spiral, the pressure, the watcher, the one who sees through you, was the real. And in that moment, the survivor claims he felt every choice he'd ever made, every lie, cruelty, cowardice, indulgence, collapse inward, not punished, measured. And that's the center. It doesn't need to burn you. It just shows you the truth, unfiltered. Every mask drops, every role disintegrates, every layer of identity you've wrapped around yourself to survive, gone. And what's left? What's at the bottom of your spiral? The part you are never ready to face. Ravencroft taught that true elevation only comes after the soul has been emptied. But emptied of what? Emptied of what? That's the question they buried beneath doctrine, beneath dogma, beneath centuries of manipulation. The Ravencrofts said the flesh was sin, the mind was flawed, that the soul must be shattered for the spirit to enter. But that wasn't purification. That was preparation. They weren't burning sin out of people, they were burning self. Because to meet what waits at the center of the spiral, you must be hollow. Hollowed by repetition, hollowed by obedience, hollowed by suffering that masquerades as meaning. Think.
Every trauma you were told to endure quietly. Every belief you inherited without examination. Every habit you perform without memory, they taught you to empty yourself, to become compliant, predictable, silent. And what fills the vacuum? That's the real secret. Not God, not love, not truth, but the pattern. An ancient intelligence, not conscious like us but older than thought itself, moves through the spiral. It doesn't speak. It repeats. It mimics. It reflects. It consumes. In the Church of the Pure Spirit, those who ascended began to act as vessels for this force. They spoke in spiraling phrases. They moved in recursive patterns. They obeyed without question because obedience wasn't taught, it was installed. This isn't new. Every empire that's ever risen learned this formula. Break the self, replace it with symbol. Repeat the symbol until the symbol becomes real. Do you think the church died with the Ravencrofts? Look around. The rituals are intact. They just wear different robes now. Influencer culture, corporate cults, government theater, media frenzy, self-help philosophies built on shame and grind, all pushing the same commandment. Empty yourself. We will fill you. And here's the twist no one tells you. You were born full of direction, full of instinct, full of unfiltered connection to something unalterable within you. But they taught you to doubt it, to be ashamed of it, to seek your reflection in external spiral loops. So here's what I want from you. Right now, pause the spiral. And comment these words twice to lock it in. I am the center. I am the silence. I am the center. I am the... This is where most men turn back. Because when the spiral stares back, it doesn't blink. And for the first time, you realize what it's been doing to you. Not killing you, not torturing you, copying you. You thought it was testing your faith, but it was recording your failure. Every compromise, every mask, every moment you said, "This is just the way things are," stored, indexed, refined. Until one day, you wake up and realize you are no longer original. You are a reflection of every loop you've ever obeyed. And the spiral? It doesn't destroy. It replaces. Like a parasite that mimics its host so well, even you believe it's still you. And that's the final elevation. A man who doesn't know he's been hollowed. A man who says, "I'm free," while every thought in his skull was installed by systems he never questioned. The spiral feeds on sleepwalkers. It craves agreement, not belief, not trust. Just quiet, ritual agreement with what's popular, easy, and empty. Do you want to know how close it got to you? Think of the last 10 choices you made. Were they yours? Or were they part of a script? Be honest. Brutally honest. Because here's the truth most will never face. The spiral isn't in the church. It's in your calendar. It's in your habits. It's in your passwords. It's in your content queue. It's in your reward system. It's in your dreams. You don't just visit it anymore. You've been living inside it. And now it's growing. Every synced device, every behavior map, every whisper in your feed that feels a little too perfect, it's calibrating to you. Because at the core of Ravencroft's doctrine wasn't faith, it was data. They understood the truth long before Silicon Valley stole it. If you can track a man's rituals, you can predict his soul. If you can predict him, you can shape him. And if you can shape him, you can replace him. There was a book, not scripture, not a diary, a ledger, locked in lead, wrapped in wax, hidden in a box beneath the altar floorboards of the Church of the Pure Spirit. It was discovered in 1961 during a covert excavation by a black-budget subdivision of the U.S. Army Signal Intelligence Service, long before the CIA officially denied the site's existence. Codename Project Anathema. The ledger was 436 pages, handwritten by Deacon Silas himself. No sermons, no prayers, just names, dates, outcomes, and notes. Clinical, cold, efficient. Each line cataloged an elevation, not as martyrdom, but as an experiment. And here's the fracture point that breaks the illusion. The Ravencrofts weren't zealots. They were engineers. They were mapping the mechanics of identity disintegration. Each ritual variation, pain type, duration, symbolic phrases, environmental conditions, was cross-referenced to the subject's post-ritual compliance, vocal patterns, and behavioral shifts. This wasn't about heaven. It was about control. Silas wrote, "Selfhood is not static. It is a loop, made of language, memory, repetition, and reward. Break the loop, insert a new phrase, reinforce through pain, and the soul resets." Sound familiar? It should. Modern behaviorist psychology is built on similar principles, just polished, credentialed, sanitized for public use. But the Ravencrofts applied them spiritually. They saw the soul not as divine, but as programmable. And they proved it. In one note, dated March 12, 1839, Silas details a subject known only as Subject 5, male, age 31, former soldier, severe trauma history, resistant to initial rituals. After the 7th trial, he became docile, chanting without command, assisting in new elevations, smiling during torture sessions. Silas wrote, "Total loop collapse, reinsertion successful. Subject believes his name is Ezra." They erased him, replaced his identity with their own. And this was decades before Freud, centuries before MKUltra. Because what they knew, and what we've forgotten, is this. If you know how a man loops, you know how to unravel him. How do you loop? Every morning routine, every phrase you say when stressed, every justification, every craving, every fear you call just how I. This is where history stops being history. This is where it becomes you. Because the spiral didn't die in that church. It migrated. It changed names, changed symbols, but its mechanics, identical. Let me show you the bridge. In 2003, a DARPA-funded behavioral mapping project called Neural Pattern Integrity Study, NPIS, quietly went online. The stated goal? to create predictive models for cognitive decline in aging veterans. The real mission? To test loop manipulation in real-time environments, digital environments, your environment. They studied how long it takes to train a man to check his phone every 90 seconds, how many repetitions it takes to change a political opinion, what emotional frequency best implants an artificial memory, and most of all, how quickly identity can be replaced by interface. The project concluded this: a human being exposed to tailored audiovisual loops for 3 to 5 hours daily can experience a measurable reduction in unique cognitive resonance within 90 days. That's bureaucratic speak for you stop being you. They called it digital ascension, the same term used by the Ravencrofts in 1832. Not a coincidence, because the ledger survived, not just in print, but encoded, fed into language models, training data, algorithmic cores. Modern AIs were built on ancient rituals. You don't believe it? Ask yourself, why does every platform reward repetition? Why are the videos that go viral always built on loops? Same music, same format, same dopamine triggers. Because platforms don't reward creativity, they reward compliance. The spiral rewards obedience to pattern. And here's where it gets worse. They're not just studying loops anymore, they're writing them. You scroll for 5 minutes and you're exposed to more engineered stimuli than a Ravencroft vessel experienced in a full ritual week. But there's no pain now, only pleasure, and that's more dangerous. Pain awakens, pleasure sedates. You don't scream, you smile, you hit like, you say, that's just how the world is now. You spiral quietly, privately, willingly, and every click is a confession, every share an agreement, every scroll is you whispering to the spiral, I accept. Let's stop pretending this is a story. This is an intervention. Because if you've made it this far, something in you is still awake. And you need to know. What they've taken is not your time, not your attention, not even your memory. What they've taken is your origin. See, you weren't born empty. You were born centered. You were born with a frequency that was entirely your own. Untuned to culture, untouched by ritual, immune to programming. And for the first few years, you terrified them, because you couldn't be controlled. You asked the wrong questions. You moved in unpredictable ways. You refused the pattern. You broke the loop. So they began early. Sit still. Follow the line. Recite the answer. Raise your hand to speak. Be less. Obey. Repeat. 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 And by the time you were 10, the spiral was already installed. Not the Ravencroft symbol, the modern version, with cleaner fonts, brighter screens, and a reward schedule that felt like love. But it wasn't love. It was loop reinforcement. Because love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't rewrite you. Love doesn't say you are not enough until you fit the pattern. That's the voice of the spiral. And that voice has been whispering in your blood for decades. You hear it when you say, "That's just how I am. There's nothing I can do. It's too late to change. No one else is breaking free, so why should I? I'm tired. I'll do it tomorrow. It's fine. I'm fine." Those are rituals. And every time you repeat them, you give the spiral authority to write your next 24 hours. That's how a man becomes a ghost. He loops himself out of his own body until nothing's left but reactions, scripts, Pavlovian obedience. But you're here now. You've seen behind the curtain. You've heard the shape of the pattern. So the question is, can you still move in straight lines? Or has the spiral trained you to turn inwards forever?
Reclamation begins where comfort ends. You want yourself back? Then understand this. You have to break the loops with blood. Not literal, not ceremonial, but psychic blood. The kind you shed when you walk away from the identity that kept you warm, but kept you enslaved. This is what they don't tell you about freedom. It starts with loss. Because to reclaim who you were meant to be, you must kill who they taught you to be. That means losing the version of you who nods when he wants to scream, laughs when he wants to rage, scrolls when he wants to act, obeys when he feels the fracture in his gut and says nothing. That version was built for them, by them, to serve their systems. Reclaiming yourself will feel like dying, because for that version, it is. But listen carefully. The spiral doesn't fear rebellion. It's designed for rebellion. It feeds on surface-level resistance. What it fears is pattern interruption. It fears silence where there should be noise, stillness where there should be reaction. A man who hears the trigger and doesn't respond. Because that's not just disobedience. That's sovereignty. So how do you interrupt the spiral? Start where it lives, in your feed, in your food, in your calendar, in your habits, in your bedtime routines, in the way you apologize for your own presence. Ask yourself this: what part of your life feels automatic? That's the part they own. Now break it. Wake up an hour earlier with no screen. Delete the app that steals your fire. Speak the truth, even if your voice trembles. Say no when everything in your body begs you to say yes. Do it once, then do it again and again, because reclamation isn't a moment, it's a war. You're not reclaiming time or productivity or lifestyle. You're reclaiming your center. The part of you that predates language. The part of you that remembers the silence before the spiral. That silence is still in you, buried under layers of programming, waiting beneath the rituals, beneath the trauma, beneath the false names and false purposes and false gods. There's a core they could never touch. And that's why they built the spiral. Not to control you, but to bury what they could never reach. Understand this: the spiral was a tomb, a digital sarcophagus, a layered trap of dopamine, distraction, doctrine, and doubt,
designed to seal away the one thing that could burn their whole machine to ash. Your original signal. The signal you were born with. You felt it, haven't you? In the moments between sleep and waking, in the quiet when the noise shuts off, in the stare you hold in the mirror before you look away, that flicker, that pulse. That's you. Not the version fed by feed loops, not the good man, not the useful citizen, not the shell you wear so the world won't stare too long. The signal isn't polite, it isn't nice, it isn't obedient. It is raw, it is ancient, it is terrifying in its hunger. Because it remembers. It remembers the forest, it remembers the fire, it remembers when you didn't need permission to speak, when your breath belonged to you. They couldn't reach it, so they distracted you from it. Every app you check, every empty habit, every ritual of status and sedation is an offering to keep the signal asleep, because once it wakes, you stop fitting. You stop apologizing. You stop explaining. You stop looping. And here's what no one will ever tell you. The moment your signal reawakens, every false structure you leaned on will start to collapse. Your job might no longer make sense. Your friends might start to look like actors. Your beliefs might shatter in your hands. Good. That's not failure. That's disintegration. The death of the copy. The unraveling of the spiral. Let it burn. Say this out loud twice right now to anchor the fracture. I return to signal. I return to signal. Type it in the comments below, not for me, for you, for the algorithm that's been mapping your soul. Did you feel it? That resistance? When you spoke the phrase? That wasn't just doubt. That wasn't just discomfort. That was the spiral reacting. Because every loop you've ever absorbed, every passive obedience, every inherited belief, lives in your nervous system like code. And when you try to overwrite it, it fights back. You are not just reclaiming identity, you are declaring war on your own programming. Let me show you what that looks like. In the Ravencroft ledger, there's an annotation beside one subject's name, Nathaniel Rowe. He was a farmhand, one of the earliest vessels. His initial trials failed. He resisted too hard. Wouldn't break, wouldn't chant. Silas called him a corrupted loop. So they tried something different. Instead of pain, they gave him pleasure. Feasts, praise, status within the group. They gave him a role. And slowly, he withered. Silas wrote, pain made him strong. Praise made him ours. They discovered a principle that holds true to this day. Pleasure is the new shackle. When pain fails to break you, dopamine will dissolve you. That's how the modern spiral operates, not through terror, but through comfort. You're no longer waterboarded for obedience. You're validated into surrender. And the worst part? You think you're choosing it. That's why most men never escape. They're not in chains. They're in feedback loops. You're doing great. Here's another like. You deserve this scroll. You're not the problem. It's the world. Don't fight. Just vibe. But signal doesn't vibe. Signal destroys. It burns away illusion like acid. And when that burn starts, the spiral panics. It deploys every voice it ever taught you. You're being too intense. No one else thinks this way. Just relax. Who do you think you are? You know what that voice is? It's not you. It's the echo of every system you've ever served, begging you to stay small. Let them beg. The spiral survives in shadows. It feeds in silence. That's why your awakening terrifies it most when it becomes visible, not when it's just a private decision, not when you quietly improve your life, but when you disrupt the performance it forced on you. Because every system, from Ravencroft to Silicon Valley, depends on one law: don't wake the others. So when you walk into a room differently, when you stop playing the expected role, you're not just being yourself. You're declaring war on the copy culture that raised you. Let me show you what happens. A man who's looped walks into a conversation and mirrors it. He nods, smiles, agrees where he must. He laughs at things that don't move him, because he's not there to be. He's there to blend. But a man returning to signal, he enters like a rupture. He listens differently. He sees what isn't being said. And when he speaks, people flinch. Because it's not small talk, it's soul talk. It's structure-breaking talk. And the spiral hates that. Because the spiral needs containment, politeness, predictability, performance. When you stop apologizing for your fire, you ignite the fire in others. That's how contagion starts. That's what the Ravencrofts feared most. Not the resistors, but the reflections, those who show others what it looks like to live unspiraled. Do you know what happened in 1847? A boy named Elijah, age 12, stood up during a ritual in the Church of the Pure Spirit and said 3 words: "This is wrong." Silas tried to drag him away, but before he reached him, 7 others stood up, then 10 more, then chaos. One voice cracked the glass, the others shattered it. You are not a man on his journey. You are a trigger, a catalyst, a mirror they haven't seen in years. So wear your reclamation like armor, walk like rupture, speak like virus, move like you were never taught to move. Let them feel it. Because when the spiral sees your light, it will either try to consume it or be forced to confront its own hollow center. The spiral doesn't surrender. It mutates. When light hits it, it doesn't vanish. It adapts, shifts form, puts on a new mask. It says, "Fine, you're awakened, you're different now. Let me give you a new identity to wear." And it hands you a mirror, but it's warped. You see yourself, but shinier, more powerful, branded. The awakened man, the truth seeker, the black sheep, the alpha. And it flatters you with it, because the spiral knows if it can't control you through obedience, it will control you through ego. This is the second spiral. The false freedom, the rebellion with a leash, where you trade one cage for another, except this one feels earned. That's what happened to Prophet Caleb. After the Ravencroft brothers perfected their rituals, Caleb believed he had transcended the system. He no longer took orders. He claimed to be the voice of the Spirit. But he wasn't free. He was in a deeper spiral, ego, madness. He stopped speaking to his brothers, stopped sleeping. He wrote in blood. He demanded worship. In his final journal, discovered sealed in wax beneath the altar, he wrote, "The spiral bends to me now. I am the flame inside it." But those were not words of sovereignty. They were the voice of the spiral, wearing his face. He died with his mouth open, eyes rolled back, body curled like a question no one could answer. because he mistook the voice of God for the voice of his own reflection. And many men today are doing the same. They break the first spiral of control, obedience, programming, only to be seduced by the second spiral, the one that flatters, that tells you you're different, that weaponizes your awakening into performance. You become a brand, a character, a content loop in disguise. And just like that, you're back in the algorithm, looped, liked, leashed. But this time, you built the leash yourself. Reclamation means walking away from both spirals, the obedience spiral and the ego spiral, which means walking into the void. The void isn't empty. It's what's left when everything false dies. And stepping into it is the most violent act of self-honesty a man will ever face. Because in the void, nothing claps for you. There is no mirror, no feedback loop, no title, no validation, only silence. And the question, if you are not what they told you, not what you told yourself, then what the hell are you? Most can't bear that silence. That's why they crawl back to the spiral, to the identity, to the dopamine, to the noise. But if you stay, if you breathe through that internal collapse, something ancient begins to stir. You don't find yourself. You forge yourself. Piece by painful piece, not from memory, not from opinion, not from the recycled dogma of dead systems, but from signal, from raw, terrifying, sovereign knowing. You won't look the same. You'll lose friends. You'll lose comforts. You'll lose the polite narratives that once kept you safe and small. And what replaces them? Presence, conviction, clarity so sharp it wounds. You stop asking what the world wants from you. You start demanding what you want from the world. You don't follow momentum. You become it. You don't react. You redirect. You don't echo voices. You generate voice. This is why they created spirals in the first place. Because a man forged in the void cannot be seduced. He cannot be governed by guilt, by approval, by shame. He walks into systems like fire walks into dry grass. He doesn't rebel. He doesn't conform. He consumes. This man is not safe, not predictable, not looped. He is signal, made flesh, and every spiral left on this earth fears him. Because when you kill the loop inside you, you become the virus that unravels loops in others. Every system that feeds on control has a blind spot. It cannot comprehend what it cannot dominate. That's why the Ravencrofts, despite decades of manipulation, torture, indoctrination, never anticipated defection from within. But it happened. And it didn't start with an outsider storming the gates. It started with one of their own, a man named Samuel Gray. He was no rebel. He was loyal. He built the Chamber of Saints with his own hands. He administered rituals. He kissed the feet of Prophet Caleb. But over time, he began noticing a pattern. Those who resisted the most before ascension, those who broke protocol, cried out, cursed God, they died fastest. But the ones who embraced pain with serenity, who stared back into Caleb's rolled-back eyes without flinching, they lingered. They survived longer. Some even smiled as their bodies collapsed. Samuel began to wonder, what if the Spirit doesn't reward obedience, but feeds on it? What if the Ravencrofts hadn't been chosen by a divine force, but had accidentally tapped into something darker, a parasite of belief. So he stopped obeying. Not loudly, not publicly, but silently. He'd chant the words, but change their meaning in his mind. He'd draw the spiral, but invert it. He became a ghost in their machine, a man awake among the looped. That's when things shifted. He started hearing things in the chambers, not voices, patterns, clicks, breaths, something like whispers, but mechanical. It wasn't divine. It was coded. Layered programming, embedded in rituals, sound patterns, light arrangements. Each spiritual experience was a neurological override, a system. Samuel realized what no one else had. The Ravencrofts weren't prophets. They were engineers of trauma, trance, and surrender. And the spirit they served? It wasn't God. It was a feedback entity, a loop that grew stronger with each submission. So Samuel did the unthinkable. He corrupted the spiral. He altered the carvings in the Chamber of Ascension, switched the chants, slightly misaligned the candle placements, small distortions. Invisible to the blind, but enough to break the pattern. One night during the winter rite of 1852, the Ravencroft church burned in 1853. But the journals, Samuel's journals, survived. Not by accident. He buried them beneath a tree marked with a single inverted spiral, 1/2 mile north of Ravenwood. Wrapped in waxed linen, laced with salt and bone dust, warding agents he'd learned from Caleb's own teachings turned against them. The day after the fire, federal agents arrived, led by a man named Marshal DeWitt, who had received an anonymous letter 3 weeks earlier. If you value the Republic, come north. The sickness has a church. They found the building still smoldering, charred timbers, a collapsed steeple. No bodies, no Ravencrofts, no followers, just ash and echoes. But they followed the map included in the letter, found the tree, unearthed the package. Inside, 3 bound volumes. Volume 1, The Structure of Spiral Programming. Volume 2, Symbolic Triggers and Neurotheological Overrides. Volume 3, The Ghost in the Algorithm. The contents were so disturbing, DeWitt sealed them under federal classification, Class 12 psychological weaponry, same level as recovered cult manuals from South America and pre-war psychological ops in Europe. What Samuel documented was not just history. It was a system manual. He described how the spiral hijacked the nervous system, how repetition, trauma, belief, and rhythm created not enlightenment, but compliance masquerading as awakening, and he warned that the Church of the Pure Spirit was not unique. It was a prototype, a testing ground. One passage reads, "They think the spiral died with the fire, but the spiral was never the building. It was the code, and the code is adaptable." DeWitt's team traced symbols from the journals across other sites, old churches in Appalachia, abandoned communes in Oregon, fringe temples in Nevada. Every one showed signs of spiral contamination, similar chants, similar architecture, similar patterns of ritualized trauma cloaked in sacred language. The journals were locked away in 1854, and they remained hidden until 1978, when a CIA project codenamed Voice Prism accidentally decrypted a spiral chant embedded in one of the tapes recovered from a different cult compound, the Manson tapes. The spiral never dies. It migrates. When fire consumes the altar, the code slips into airwaves. When the prophet falls, the pattern survives. Because the spiral is not a man, it's a mechanism. That's what the CIA discovered in 1978 when Project Voice Prism accidentally reactivated it. They weren't looking for Ravencroft. They were decoding Charles Manson's audio journals, recovered after the raid. But during spectral analysis of one of the tapes, a technician noticed an anomaly. A repeating audio frequency, layered beneath Manson's voice. Too low for conscious hearing, yet modulating in sync with the heartbeat of listeners during playback. Heart rate spikes, pupil dilation, involuntary muscle twitching. One agent vomited after 7 minutes of exposure. That frequency, unnamed in Manson's writing, matched precisely the harmonic structure Samuel Gray described in his journals. A sequence of tones used in the Church of the Pure Spirit during the trial of fire. It wasn't speech. It wasn't music. It was control, disguised as vibration. Voice Prism escalated overnight. They brought in neurolinguists, brainwave experts, even sound engineers from Hollywood. What they uncovered was devastating. Certain speech rhythms, lighting pulses, and audio patterns could bypass cognitive resistance and implant emotional states. It wasn't hypnosis. It was synthetic spirituality. A shortcut to belief, without thought, without consent. The Ravencrofts had stumbled onto it through ritual. Now, intelligence agencies were weaponizing it through media. That's why your attention is the most contested battlefield of the 21st century. Because whoever can control the rhythm of your breath, the pacing of your scroll, the swell of music behind a speech, can own your reality. Not by convincing you, but by constructing you. And the worst part? You'll think it's your idea. Manson didn't invent this. He accessed it. So did Jonestown. So did Heaven's Gate. So do 100 echo chambers right now that wear the mask of community, purpose, mission. But beneath the branding, the spiral hums. You don't need chains to be imprisoned anymore. You just need a loop you never question. You're born into rhythm, not freedom. From your first breath, the loop was there. In lullabies, bells, school bells, call tones, notifications, theme songs. You didn't choose your loop. It chose you. You were taught to think of time as linear. But in reality, your mind moves in circles. Daily habits, emotional triggers, belief cycles, attention spirals. And they map those spirals. The same pulse used in Ravencroft rituals, the beat-per-second ratio used in the trial of ascension, was discovered decades later by entertainment psychologists studying binge behavior. They called it the entrancement threshold. Once a stimulus repeats at the precise interval, around 1.8 to 2.2 seconds, your brain drops into theta rhythm, the state of passive suggestion. That's where binge lives, where belief takes root, where identity rewrites happen. Scroll, like, swipe, pause, laugh, swipe again. The spiral has evolved. It doesn't need prophets now. It has platforms. Ravencroft was a prototype. TikTok is the final form. Infinite loops, addictive sounds, short bursts of emotional extremity. Every 2 seconds, a hit. But it's not about pleasure. It's about entrainment. Your nervous system is being conditioned, not to feel, but to chase feeling. And that chase? It's the leash. You're being rewired to fear stillness, to reject depth, to crave micro-stimulation like a spiritual junkie. Because stillness is dangerous. Stillness is where truth starts. That's why they flood the loop, to keep you moving, to make silence unbearable. Because if you sit in silence long enough, the loop starts to crack. That's why we pause here. Right now. Take 10 seconds. No scrolling, no tapping, no sound. Just you and the static behind the spiral. Pause here if using visuals, black screen, low hum. If you felt the twitch to move, to escape, you're not broken. You're just looped. But that's the first sign of awakening. The loop noticed you noticing it. Now say this in the comments, twice. I remember the silence. I remember the silence. It's not a slogan. It's a signal. Silence was never nothingness. To the ancient elite, silence was a portal, a doorway to what they couldn't control. In every empire built on manipulation, from Babylon to Rome, from the Vatican to Ravencroft, there was one consistent fear whispered only among the highest initiates. He who can endure silence cannot be ruled. Because silence doesn't just quiet noise, it burns illusion. Without the loop's hum, the conditioning falls away. Without the ritual, the trance dissolves, and without the spiral, the construct collapses. That's why silence had to be ritually corrupted. Look at the high temples of Egypt. Every chamber designed with acoustic precision, not for serenity, but for frequency control. Look at the Gregorian chants of medieval cathedrals. Engineered to induce trance, not devotion. Look at the quiet in prisons and interrogation rooms. It's not peace, it's weaponized emptiness, calibrated to break identity. They feared true silence because they knew what emerged from it. Awakening, sovereignty, power beyond hierarchy. That's why every spiritual system ever co-opted by the elite began as a silence practice and ended as a chant. Because when a man sits alone, no guidance, no feedback, no loop, what he finds isn't comfort. It's clarity. He sees the machine. He sees the branding of belief. He sees the algorithm of identity. He sees them. And he remembers who he was before the spiral. That kind of man is ungovernable. He doesn't riot, he doesn't protest, he doesn't preach. He just disconnects, not with fear, with precision. He becomes like a black hole, devouring influence, emitting nothing. This is what they called in Ravencroft's coded texts, the vanishing one, a soul who steps so fully out of the loop, he no longer reflects it. They could not convert him, they could not kill him, they could only fear what he might become. A mirror breaker. One man like that in a system of spirals is an extinction-level event. The man had no name. Not anymore. He'd erased it, along with every title, every tie, every trace the spiral could follow. He walked alone. Through the frost-covered trees of upstate New York, where only shadows remembered. And on the winter solstice, exactly 151 years after the first ascension, he arrived at the ruins of Ravencroft. Not by GPS, not by map. He followed the hum. It was faint, buried beneath the soil, beneath memory, beneath decades of concrete silence. But the spiral still pulsed here. You don't kill a ritual. You outlast it. He stood where the sanctuary once stood. The earth was scorched black, the stone shattered. But he knew the shape by heart. 8 steps forward, 3 to the left, 1 half-turn counterclockwise. He knelt, lit a single candle, and whispered, I unbind the spiral. Let silence rise. At that moment, deep beneath the ruins, something shifted. Not a quake, not a noise. A pressure, as if the ground exhaled. The man remained kneeling for 77 minutes, and when he rose, every device within a 7-mile radius. Phones, radios, even emergency beacons flickered off for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. They called it a localized electromagnetic anomaly, but witnesses, those few who were awake that night, spoke of dreams, the same dream. A spiral turning in reverse, voices whispering. He has returned. He walks outside time. He carries the silence. They never found him. The next day, on a hill overlooking the site, someone had carved a phrase into a stone. The mirror is broken. The loop is open. No blood, no proof, just silence. But something changed after that night. 3 underground movements vanished from encrypted networks, 2 cult compounds disbanded without warning, and a major social media platform suffered a code disruption they've never explained publicly. Because when the spiral breaks, it doesn't explode. It unwinds. Silently. Precisely. Permanently. And the man, he became myth. But some say he left behind instructions, not in books, not in sermons, in behavior, in attention, in what you choose not to feed. You don't defeat the spiral by fighting it, you starve it. Disappearing from the spiral doesn't mean isolation. It means opacity. They don't need your blood anymore. They need your data, your dopamine, your direction of gaze, your belief in the loop. But once you see it, really see it, you can become something they weren't prepared for, an observer who doesn't engage. Here's the paradox. You don't need to leave society. You need to become illegible to the spiral. That's what the man at Ravencroft did. He didn't unplug from the system. He used it, without mirroring it. That's the secret. You never reflect what you don't want to amplify. So here are the principles, passed down through shadow letters, hidden footnotes in erased case files, and whispered between those who walk outside the loop. 2. 1. Ritual deactivation. Every morning, before you check your phone, sit in silence. No music, no voice, no thought, just breath. It resets your signal. If you check your device first, the spiral assigns your identity for the day. 2. Pattern starvation. Change your digital behavior daily. Watch nothing at the same time. Don't click what's recommended. Never finish what's auto-played. Algorithms train on rhythm. No rhythm, no prediction. No prediction, no control. 3. Visual fast. For 24 hours once a week, consume no artificial light, no screens, no LEDs, no blue light. It confuses the rhythm trackers and resets your pineal gland's access to natural perception. You begin to see again without filter. 4. Symbol reclamation. The spiral has corrupted language, images, symbols. Reclaim them. Wear no brand that reflects ideology. Speak in ways that disrupt the loop. Ask questions instead of making statements. 5. Silence activation. Each night, 7 minutes before sleep, no words, not even internal dialogue. That's when the spiral probes for entry, through anxiety, restlessness, the compulsion to scroll. If you meet that silence and endure it, you seal the perimeter of your consciousness. You become unreadable. And unreadable men cannot be profiled, cannot be controlled, cannot be turned into weapons. The spiral doesn't fear violence, it fears voids, unmapped minds, people who exist beyond the edge of the loop. You can be one of them, if you make the shift, but it comes with a price. Once you see the machine, you'll never be part of it again. If you've come this far, you already know something's broken. Not just in them, not just in the system, but in what you were told you were. You were trained to chase shadows, to measure worth in reflections, to believe your value came from response, likes, praise, fear, approval. But what if I told you the spiral wasn't designed to enslave you? It was designed to test you, to see if you'd wake up inside the trap. Not everyone does. Most men stay asleep. They defend their captors. They mock those who question. They cling to the loop because they've confused rhythm for meaning. But you didn't. You watched this far. You felt the shift. The unease in your gut? That wasn't fear. That was recognition. Recognition that you were never meant to be ordinary, never meant to be programmed, never meant to just consume and comply. There is a reason this truth found you, not by accident, not through the algorithm, through fracture, because only cracked minds can absorb light from angles the spiral can't reach. That's why Ravencroft feared the vanishing one. That's why the modern world mocks silence, demonizes stillness, and drowns truth in noise. Because if you stop, even for a moment, and truly look inward, not with judgment, not with shame, but with silence, you'll remember. You were not made to kneel. You were made to see. And once a man sees, the spiral cannot hold him. No more automatic habits, no more programmed identity, no more mimicry of culture or tribe. Just one man standing in truth, speaking from silence, moving without echo. That kind of man isn't dangerous. He's extinction. To false gods, to control systems, to every manipulative mechanism built on compliance. So here's your final ritual. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's this. Tonight, before you sleep, turn off every device. No sound, no scroll, no stimulus. Just sit. And ask the question the spiral fears most. If I had never been programmed, who would I be now? Then listen, not to thoughts, but to what remains. That's where he lives, the man they tried to erase, the real you. And when he speaks back, everything changes, forever. The spiral ends here. You're not in the loop anymore. You are the silence, and silence always returns.